From the Dolphin Tuna, please do a video on the education system. Things have gotten really bad in Ontario even over the past couple of years. My younger siblings spend their English classes learning about Marx and privilege, rather than, actually reading books. While my time in high school wasn't too bad, I'm hearing some ridiculous stuff that's changed since I graduated. Like really ridiculous, racist, whack job stuff being taught in class to impressionable teenagers, up to and including teachers standing up and apologizing to students of color on behalf of white people. Utterly ridiculous stuff that has no place in the classroom if you don't want to produce a generation of prejudiced twats. Well, say no more, pal. In the last video, I presented the Maclean's article, Why Are Schools Brainwashing Our Children, as an example of good writing by the magazine in the past. Let's take a closer look at it. To those who don't keep up with education trends, certain recent events might appear to be unrelated. In May, a grade 3 class in Toronto took to the streets with signs and an oversized papier-mâché oil pipeline to protest the laying of an actual pipeline in Western Canada. Last year, in Toronto, first graders brought home student planners marked with the International Days of Zero Tolerance on Female Genital Mutilation and ending violence against sex workers, as a means to spark conversation on the issues. In Laval, Quebec, a 6-year-old boy was disqualified from a teddy bear contest because a plastic Ziploc bag was found in his lunch instead of a reusable container. In St. Marie-de-Kent, New Brunswick, in 2009, grade 4 students were given 10 minutes to decide which 3 people from this group should be saved from an imminent planetary explosion: a black African, a Chinese person, an Aboriginal, an Acadian Francophone, and an Anglophone. Here we go, right out of the gate, and we're already confronting some of the most SJW corrupted nonsense I've ever seen. Do you guys really think that a class of grade 3s understand the nuances in an oil pipeline debate? Or that it's appropriate for grade 1s to be talking about genital mutilation? These are just a handful of examples of the more peculiar byproducts of a vision gaining ground amongst many education architects. An elementary school education rooted in social justice principles. Interestingly, faculties of education in Canada and much of the Western world are preparing their student teachers to weave social justice throughout the primary school curriculum, in math and science, language arts and social studies, drama and even gym class, as well as into a range of cross-curricular activities, events, and projects. The idea is to encourage kids to become critical analysts of contemporary issues, empathetic defenders of human rights, and gatekeepers of the beleaguered earth. Oh yes, that's exactly what we need. We don't need to be teaching math in math class, or science in science class, or literature in literature class. These kids need to be learning about social justice, everywhere, all the time. Because how else is anybody going to buy into your blatantly false ideology unless you indoctrinate them from birth like a religious sect? When it comes to the question of what's appropriate to broach with young children, conflicts abound. Last month, Toronto parents were incensed to learn that the Toronto District School Board webpage promoting health education included a link to an organization that suggested kids explore their sexuality by experimenting with sex toys and vegetables. Jesus Christ, just conflicts abound, eh? Nothing really to worry about here. It's just 2 groups having a minor disagreement over a policy. It's not the school board, an arm of the Ministry of Education, the Canadian government, telling kids to buy sex toys and masturbate with vegetables. Obviously, I've got nothing against sex toys, but kids are going to discover masturbation on their own anyway. They don't need government guidance on the topic. I mean, honestly, did the lunatic over at the Toronto School Board who decided to put this up have a problem figuring out how to jack off as a kid without the school getting involved? Like the article said, the Toronto District School Board since taken down its sex advice for kids section. But as you know, the internet never forgets. The website's not on the internet Wayback Machine, but due to the hundreds of articles published about this story, it wasn't hard to dig up some screen caps. This is about the best image of the page in question that I could find. I don't know why the original creator of this image put the red arrow where he did, because the link in question is this one down here, the Coalition for Positive Sexuality. And because their website, positive.org, is still up, I've been able to find the page that the Toronto District School Board linked to. Let's just see what exactly they've been recommending to kids for ourselves. Most of us learn that sex means a man on top of a woman, and that the only other choice is abstinence. But sex can be lots of things. Women have sex with women, men have sex with men, women have sex with men, and sometimes the best sex is with yourself. Yeah, you keep telling yourself that. There are lots of safe and fun ways to get off, which you probably won't learn in school. Well, that's certainly not true anymore, isn't it? You could suck, kiss, touch, bite, fondle, nibble, squeeze, and lick someone's body, nipples, calves, toes, neck, ass, dick, or vulva, jerk yourself off or each other off, dry or using lots of lubricant, kiss for a long time using lots of tongue, have sex in front of mirrors or watch each other jerk off, get into role play, for instance, tie someone up and pleasure them, look at sexy pictures and videos, make up or act out fantasies, talk dirty, dress up, strip down, or cross-dress, dressing in the clothes of the other gender. Just remember that traps are gay. Call your friend and tell him or her your hottest fantasies. If you want to lose a friend, sure. Use cock rings, nipple clamps, or clothespins, or vibrators on your own or someone else's body. I guess this is the kraut and tea section. Shower together, or grind against each other with your clothes on, dry humping. Come on someone's belly, back, feet, chest, instead of in them. Play with your own or someone else's ass or vagina. Put your fingers, dildos, vegetables, or butt plugs into them. Yes, let's tell kids to put cucumbers in their ass. This will turn out well. If you're putting something into a butthole, make sure it has a flared base and looks something like the picture. That way it can't go all the way in and get stuck. Why, thank you. Thank you for that picture. I'm sure a 6-year-old is going to look at that, remember his old soother, and go try something stupid. Fucking incredible. Let's get back to the Maclean's article. Between the mounting examples of how social justice education can go wrong and the passionate defenses from those responsible for training teachers, the fight is growing over what's going on in primary classrooms. Its proponents argue that today's students are especially in need of it. A growing mandate to integrate special education students into mainstream classrooms requires better understanding from children. A new awareness of the effects of bullying puts the onus on teachers to inculcate empathy in students. An increased diversity in the classroom can fuel intolerance from all sides. So from what I can gather, the argument here is that some people want social justice in grade school in Canada, because simply teaching math and literature and science isn't enough to provide a cultural bulwark against Nazi-style authoritarianism. They actually use that example in the article. And a morals-based education would provide for racial diversity, it would help stop bullying, and it would create a more empathetic generation of people. The counter-argument, which is also given its fair shake in the article, is that math class is for math, not morality. There are plenty of other classes like drama, arts, or literature that can provide a philosophical or moral background, which I personally believe is an important part of education, but there's no place for it in the hard sciences. I obviously find the second position more appealing than the first, and here's why. When the proponents of social justice education say that their education is morals-based, I just don't believe them. I don't believe them because they show grade 4s pictures of dead gorillas in the Congo as a part of the curriculum of humans' effects on the environment. I don't believe them because a grade 5 math lesson involved calculating the amount the Canadian government spent on the war in Afghanistan, the amount it spends on poverty, and the lesson, a math lesson, culminated in a letter-writing campaign to elected MPs. I'm not saying these topics can't be talked about at all, there's legitimate discussion to be had here, but not with kids. Not when they're in a school system that prioritizes performance and regurgitation over actual learning and critical thinking. They're meant to be learning the skills and tools to tackle the tough problems later in life, not indoctrinated into tackling them right now in exactly the way the teacher, the school board, or the government wants them to. I'll discuss this more in detail in the next part, but I think it's pertinent to point out here that Canadian grade schools are forcing controversial topics of discussion onto children when it's inappropriate to do so, while Canadian universities are censoring controversial topics of discussion when it's legal adults in the room, not kids. And as we've seen with the Lindsay Shepherd situation, they're doing it with the justification that the students are just too young to be able to handle it. So what the hell is driving all of this? Margaret Wente over at the Globe and Mail has a hypothesis to offer up. In her article, Your New School Curriculum, Social Justice for All. Equality is no longer the goal. The new goal is equity, a very different concept. According to a sweeping draft plan prepared for the Toronto District School Board, equity is not achieved by treating students fairly. It is achieved by challenging entrenched systems of power and privilege, and constantly working to center the conversation around the effects of inequity, oppression, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of hate and discrimination specifically for racialized students. In other words, kids' success or failure is shaped by historic forces that determine their victim status. The vexed question of why some racialized students do extremely well and others not so well is not addressed. Equality means treating everyone equally, removing all institutional barriers to success, and letting people succeed or fail based on their merits and their hard work. Equity at least the way the Toronto District School Board has defined it, is about making sure everybody's results are the same. Nobody does too poorly compared to the norm, nobody does too well compared to the norm, everybody's just the same. It's a reframing of the equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome debate. If you believe in the idea that individual people are different from one another, and by the way, this idea is known as the truth, then somewhere down the line, those differences will lead to different outcomes in what those individuals choose to do with their lives, both in terms of what they devote themselves to and how good they are at doing it. If there's no institutional barriers put in the way of this process, that's equality of opportunity. That's freedom. And there's always going to be at least a little bit of inherent inequality in a free society, because freedom means people are free to make the wrong choices in life, or even the right choices that are simply less optimized in practice. Meanwhile, the proponents of equality of outcome state that in a system where there's no institutional barriers in place, all outcomes will naturally be the same. This is because they believe there's no fundamental differences between individuals, so that all human beings should be able to do roughly the same thing. And if they don't, it's because institutional barriers still exist, hidden somewhere, and it's the job of society to remove them. Remember back in my video, Why Capitalism is a Success? I made a remark to the effect that socialists and communists don't take into account human passion when ordering the production of their societies. Equality of outcome is the practical reality of that theory, and when played out in the real world, it amounts to the flattening of people's lives. Margaret Wente describes this in relation to Canada's public schools. One mother wrote me that social justice and equity are now the focus of her son's school. At parent council meetings, they talk about microaggressions. There is no room, it seems, for white children or mixed children, she lamented. Her children are mixed. In the name of social justice, grade 9 math is being de-streamed. De-streaming is a big deal these days. Streaming is unjust, we're told, because kids in the applied stream are less successful at math than kids in the academic stream. This is attributed not to their lower math skills, but to structural elements that divide students. Putting the applied kids in the academic stream will raise their aspirations, their self-esteem, and therefore their results. As Ontario's new equity plan says confidently, given the opportunity and the right supports, all students can succeed in the academic stream. For those of you who don't know, classes are divided into 2 levels in high school over here, applied and academic. This doesn't include special education or gifted education. Applied and academic are the 2 categories for the general population. Applied classes are meant to teach practical knowledge that can be used in a trade school or a blue-collar job, while academic classes teach the same content and the same topics, but tailored for a university, business, or research setting. At least, that's how it was when I was in high school. Now the classes are being de-streamed, and everybody's being forced into one class regardless of their skills, their intelligence, their prior education, or their goals after they've left the school. And it's being done not because of budget cuts, it's being done because of social justice. Because if the academic classes are privileged, then equality of outcome demands that everybody be in them. And if some students underperform, it's blamed on institutional barriers. The results of this new program are exactly as you'd expect. Here's what will happen with de-streaming, wrote Don Cooper, a retired teacher, in a letter to the Toronto Star. Grade 9 teachers will be faced with a classroom with more academic and social disparity, which will be much more difficult to educate. Translation: struggling kids will be the losers. All of those underprivileged kids that this social justice nonsense is supposed to help, they're the ones who are going to suffer the ill effects of it. A huge predictor of problems at school, more than race, gender, sexuality, or whatever, is the stability of the family home, and no amount of anti-bias training on the part of the teachers or social justice-infused curriculums in the classroom are going to help with that. And you know what? People wanting to escape this nonsense are probably just going to be shit out of luck. Ontario parents uncomfortable with social justice education may have nowhere else to go. Well, of course not. What use would a massive propaganda vehicle be if people could simply opt out of it? Few parents would object to schools trying to teach children about the importance of respecting others and the harms caused by discrimination. But there's no consensus on the definition of some of the problems the social justice curriculum aims to identify and stamp out. So teaching could easily cross the line from education to political indoctrination. It's easy to imagine how teaching on these issues could go off the rails in an elementary school if teachers view the inculcation of a particular worldview as part of their job. Moreover, the rise of social justice education may squeeze out other proven approaches to character education focused primarily on developing student resilience and accountability. That's actually a good point. Social justice and taking responsibility for your life are 2 incompatible points of view. Social justice teaches that if you're a victim, it's not your fault. It's your parents, or it's societies, or it's the schools, or it's the patriarchy. If you're not reaching your potential, some kind of power structure exists that's keeping you down. However, when you take responsibility for your life, the social justice theory has to go out the window. Taking responsibility doesn't mean that you're not a victim. It doesn't mean that where you came from isn't real, or that what happened to you is your fault. It simply means that you say, regardless of what happened in my past, what's been done to me unjustly, I'm going to do the best I can right now to own my actions, my reactions, my thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to do the best I can with what I have. Social justice emphasizes that because you were wronged, somebody else needs to take action to fix you. But personal responsibility emphasizes that even if it's somebody else's fault, even if it's not right or fair, you've got to fix your own life as best you can. This article mentions that the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario is increasingly relying on a resource titled Social Justice Begins With Me. Let's take a look at some of the sample pages of this curriculum. Here's one based around the children's book, A Shelter in Our Car. The book's about a homeless Jamaican family that live out of a car. I'm actually not opposed to children's books like this. Children's books from my childhood and earlier routinely evoked sadness or anger, but they were tailored towards kids. I don't know if A Shelter in Our Car is tailored towards kids or not, but check out the lesson plan. Investigate the roles that racism and gender discrimination play in unemployment and in salary inequity. How much money do women make in comparison to men? What is the situation for racialized women? I guess grade 5 is young enough for wage gap indoctrination, according to this program. I would presume that the characters in this book make less money than the norm not because they're black, Jamaican, or women, but because they live in a fucking car. But saying that in class might get you sent to the principal's office. Also, what pleb wrote this? You don't need the feature-related bit in the YouTube URL. Were you just clicking around YouTube finding related SJW links and dumping them into the program as fast as you could? I've been talking primarily about Ontario schools, but this is happening coast to coast in Canada. For example, Social Justice 12 is currently offered in British Columbia high schools. This is an exciting elective course that is currently being offered in some school districts in BC. It was approved by the Ministry of Education in August 2008. What is social justice? Social justice is the assurance that the basic human rights of all people are upheld. Examine social justice issues such as racism, homophobia, sexism, poverty, and globalization. This course will offer you the opportunity to look at the causes and consequences of oppression and injustice, both in Canada and globally. Challenge yourself to become an educated, fair, and open-minded global citizen. There's a lot wrong here, but getting into it would just be retreading old ground at this point. I'll just point this one thing out. This curriculum considers globalization a social justice issue on the level of racism and sexism, but also invites the reader to be a global citizen. Recognize the problem in the classroom, but take your place as a worker drone afterward, you husk. Challenge yourself to become an ethical, socially responsible global citizen. This is a case study and research-based course. There is no final exam, but a final action project will be required of all students. Oh, excellent. No final exam. Just go do a protest or something. Man, I would have had a fuckload of fun with this back in high school, let me tell you. Even back then, I was a bit of a shitlord. In Abbotsford, back in 2008, the school board decided to ban the Social Justice 12 class. At least that's what the Social Justice 12 page says. Watch this video to gain an understanding on the Social Justice 12 conference in Abbotsford. Alright, let's take a look.
Equity is something we want to get at, ideally, that idea of fairness and justice, but equality is a tricky road. Equality gets us into the fight where people say, when is there going to be a straight holiday? Where's the straight pride parade?
Whoa, that's a woke take, isn't it? Yes, valuing equality in your school system will make people want to be treated equally, and you can't have that, can you?
Students need to know more about for other sexualities.
I bet this guy turned out to be a cutie Asian trap due to all this shit.
For our youth life to be interested in what more that we're thinking throughout our lives.
Oh, it's actually a girl. My bad, ma'am. Sir. Sure. So, what was the Abbotsford School Board's reasoning for banning Social Justice 12? Well, this article from September 19th, 2008, from the Vancouver Sun, states that Abbotsford School District has ordered its schools not to offer a controversial new elective course called Social Justice 12 until it has a chance to review the content. So it was never banned, they just wanted a chance to examine the course for themselves. That would make sense, since Social Justice 12 was only devised 1 month earlier in August 2008. On October 9th, 2008, the Abbotsford School Board began discussions over Social Justice 12, and by February 10th, 2009, they had decided to allow it in their schools the following fall. The school board's desire to examine for themselves the content of a newly created optional curriculum, and not simply blindly going forward with it, generated protests like these. Your ideological pet projects are not, and should not be immune to a process of review, you fucking zombies. And of course, I also have a copy of Social Justice 12. Let's take a peek inside. This stuff is vague enough that I can really see some some young MRA or something co-opting the whole thing for shits and giggles. But this bit at the bottom, opportunities for lifelong participation in social justice, I guess this class expects to just churn out obedient little SJWs who will go on to obey the diversity centers of their universities and the diversity officers of their workplaces. Here's a task a class may be given to discuss and present an answer about. Formulate a response to ethical questions related to social justice. Example, are morals and values absolute? Do the ends justify the means? Should there be limitations on freedom of expression? What rights should humans have over animals? Is there such a thing as a just war? What responsibility do individuals have to consider the common good? How does one reconcile a conflict of values or rights? This is stuff that you'd expect from a philosophy class, but that's the point. Social justice sees itself as the natural replacement to philosophy. A philosophy degree might qualify you for a job at Starbucks, but philosophy itself is important. It's why science or engineering degrees generally require 1 credit in applied ethics or philosophy. Not necessarily for broad-based learning, but because it's important to understand why you're doing something almost as much as how you're doing it. Philosophy gives us our moral guidance, our ethical underpinning, and social justice wants to co-opt that spot in our society in order to push its own agenda. Don't believe me? Check out this question in the next section. Identify the types of decisions made by government that promote the common good. Example, non-smoking legislation, legislation against drunk driving, gun control legislation, freedom of information, worker protection. You can't simply assume that these pieces of legislation promote the common good. There's certainly well-reasoned arguments for them being in the common good, but there's also well-reasoned arguments for them being against the common good. But while that debate might have been allowed in philosophy or ethics, it's not in Social Justice 12. There's more examples than ever of this bullshit right now. The Making Space program, Seeing the Rainbow, and so on. Canadian public schools are SJW everything, and we're already beginning to see the negative effects. A Greek Orthodox Christian has been battling his school board in court for 7 years, not to try and stop LGBT content from being taught at the school his kids attend, and not even to have the authority to pull his kids from those classes on a pick-and-choose basis, despite some misleading headlines in the matter, but to simply be informed by the school when LGBT content was specifically going to be covered before the day of class, and the school refused. And he lost his court case with the judge ruling that simply declaring his parental authority in the matter would oversimplify common law principles that were not in dispute. The judge also quipped that he can simply pull his kids from public schooling entirely if he has a problem with it. Well, that's a really shitty fucking answer. But more importantly, I would not be surprised if that stops being an option for parents in the near future. There's also a financial cost as well. Schools in Canada are going broke, with some teachers resorting to crowdfunding classes. Curtis Weeb has only been teaching for 4 years, but he's already an old hand when it comes to using technology to engage his grade 6 and grade 7 students. But the way he and others like him are funding the necessary classroom equipment is making some people extremely uneasy. Weeb is making his classroom a learning lab thanks to a set of small programmable robots he recently received from a 4-year-old Toronto-based charity called My Class Needs. Next on his wish list, virtual reality headsets to make learning literally out of this world for students, to realize his dream of helping his pupils experience what Mars is like. The charity says it has improved the learning environment for more than 88,000 kids in public schools in Canada. But critics say it's also furthering inequality in the public school system and opening the door to letting private money replace government dollars. It sounds to me like private money is augmenting government dollars, not replacing them. It also sounds to me like these cries of furthering inequality are just jealousy. Weeb's found a way to get extra resources for his classes. He's not taking anything away from other classes in order to do this. He's not driving down the quality of anybody else's education. When somebody cries inequality because somebody else is improving themselves or their station, it just sounds petty. But most importantly of all, why are Canadian public schools having to resort to crowdfunding in the first place? Surely there's enough money to go around. Maybe there's a few useless programs out there we can afford to cut. I can't really think of any though. Special thanks to everyone who supports me on Patreon. You guys should be able to see your names on screen right now. If you're interested in my other content, I have a gaming channel called No Talent Gaming. What usually happens is that I stream on YouTube or Twitch about 4 times a week, and then I upload those streams to NTG afterward. So look forward to it. I love you.